Dear friends, students and learners, I am Dr. Shashank Shrivastava from the School of Engineering and Technology, Indira Gandhi National Open University. So as you know, I am discussing with you the course Material Science, and in that I am discussing with you a subpart, that is mechanical properties of materials. So till now we have discussed up to the hardness property. So today now we are going to discuss about a very important thing which is known as fatigue. What is fatigue? In general sense, if you talk about fatigue, what is that? Like a human body, when it gets tired, then we say that we are fatigued. So similar is the case with different kinds of materials also. So most structures are subjected to loads that vary with time. So it's a dynamic kind of thing. Dynamic means the time factor comes in. So like you have the aerodynamic loads, the wind loading on the buildings, the earth resistance to earth moving machines. So all these kinds of loads are dynamic loads which keep on changing with time. The point to be noted is that the material behavior changes under variable loads. So different kinds of the properties of the materials and their behavior, they change upon the variable loads which are varying with time. Failure of several structures due to fatigue loading has resulted in loss of lives and property in the recent past. So such cases have been there, like any bridge failure is there, or any other, suppose space shuttle failure is there. So there are certain materials used in these things which may be failing with time and we may not be knowing about them. So again, why is fatigue so important? Because weakness of the material is going on increasing under varying loads. A stress level at which failure under static condition will not take place is not safe if the stress repeats with respect to time. So failure under static condition occurs at a higher stress level, but if the load is varying, then it occurs at a lower stress level. Theoretically, there is no stress level for most materials which will be indefinitely safe. So in theoretical sense, if we see, then there is no such stress level where we can say no, beyond this or below this, no failure will take place. However, practically, some safe stress level can be defined and determined for some specified number of cycles. So in practical terms, as we see, we define certain stress level below which we say, okay, now it will be safe even if you increase the number of cycles. Fatigue takes place in a brittle manner, so there is no plastic deformation giving a warning for impending failure. So this is a very important thing which we need to know. It is saying that fatigue will take place in a brittle manner. So brittle fracture, we know it just happens. There is no warning. In case of ductile material, we have seen earlier that necking and all those things take place. But in case of brittle fracture, nothing happens like that. So it is instantaneous, we can say. So one example of that is like one airlines around in 1980s, it was Aloha Airlines flight, and the upper portion of the fuselage broke like that. So it was also a kind of fatigue only. Fatigue loads that are imposed upon machine parts and structures in service may be random in nature, as illustrated in the figure given. So here is one graph. You can see that the load is completely random. It is sometimes going towards the positive side, sometimes towards the negative side of the x-axis. Laboratory tests are performed under sinusoidal stresses for convenience. So to make this random load a little convenient for us to see its effect, we use sinusoidal stresses as shown in the figure given or figure named as B. So techniques have been developed to use these results for application under actual service condition. The sinusoidal stress variation is shown in the figures as I mentioned before also. So this stress cycle is also termed fluctuating. See, it's fluctuating. Like if you see a bulb, if the voltage in your house is fluctuating, then the bulb light also fluctuates. So this is what is fluctuation. The stress also fluctuates like that. About 90% of data are collected under fully reversed stress cycle. Meaning, suppose the stress is on the positive side, at some point, then it will be towards the negative and equal magnitude when the cycle is going forward. So this is what is reversal of stress, meaning one time it is completely positive and the other time it is completely negative with the same magnitude, so meaning that in the opposite direction. So fully reversed stress cycle in which the mean stress is 0 and the stress ratio is given by R, that is sigma minimum upon sigma maximum. Sigma minimum is the minimum stress and sigma maximum is the maximum stress, and this mean stress is sigma max plus sigma min divided by 2, and variable stress component is given by sigma max minus sigma min divided by 2. So now we discuss the test procedure for fatigue. So here we see that applied stress can be of different types. It can be axial or of bending type or of torsion or their combination. Like all these loads we have discussed in our earlier sessions. So in each case a particular type of machine is required. When you have different types of loads, so different types of machines are used. The simplest type of machine which is largely used is rotating bending type, which is given here in the figure. In this machine as shown in the figure, a dead weight is applied upon the specimen through bearing while the specimen rotates. Generally the specimen is loaded as a cantilever or under 4-point bending. As given in the figure, it's like a cantilever. A fatigue testing machine must have a counter to record the number of cycles and a micro switch to stop the motor when a specimen fails. So what we need to do here, we run the specimen at a certain stress level until it fails. The number of cycles after which the specimen fails is known as the life of the specimen at a particular stress level and is recorded. Thus, a number of observations for stress levels and corresponding number of cycles to failure are obtained. Generally, several specimens at each stress level are tested. For obtaining fatigue curves, the stress levels are plotted as ordinates and logarithms of number of cycles are plotted as abscissa. So this is a curve where your stress is on the y-axis and your logarithm of the number of cycles is on the x-axis. Why we are taking logarithmic? Because it gives a certain number. Like suppose it is 10 to the power 4 cycles. When we take log of that to the base 10, then it gives us the number 4. So we can represent it on the scale in a convenient manner, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and all. For plotting these observations, semi-log papers are used because one axis is log based and the other one is simple. A typical plot of fatigue curve is shown in the figure. It can be seen that fatigue curve tends to flatten for large number of cycles, meaning that it is becoming parallel to the x-axis after a large number of cycles. The highest stress level is so chosen that number of cycles of failure is around 10 to the power of 4. The fatigue curve is seldom investigated for cycles less than this. Because if we are looking after fatigue, so we need a number of cycles. We cannot say, okay, I have done for 10 or 15 or 20. No, we need a larger number. So that minimum is around 10 to the power of 4. Further, the fatigue tests are rarely continued beyond 10 to the power of 8 cycles because such long endurances are not common in service and time required for them will be very long. So if we want to go to the number of cycles as 10 to the power of 8, then it will take a very long time. So this fatigue testing will require a very long time and it will not be practical for us. And endurances and also the material becomes more endurant after a certain number of cycles. So we don't need to go to such large number of cycles as 10 to the power of 8. The fatigue strength of material is defined as the maximum alternating stress which a material will withstand for given number of cycles. So this is the fatigue strength of the material. That is the maximum alternating stress which a material can withstand for a given number of cycles. This number of cycles is mostly taken at 10 to the power 6 to 10 to the power 2 cycles, except in some special cases. It is to be noted that whenever fatigue strength is described, the corresponding number of cycles must also be mentioned. So fatigue without mentioning the number of cycles has no meaning because it's dependent on the dynamic type of loading. There are some materials for which failure does not occur once the specimen has endured nearly 10 to the power of 6 cycles. That's why it is a standard that suppose a specimen has already endured 10 to the power of 6 cycles without failure, then we take it as such that this material is now not going to failure. So this S log n curve comprise of two straight lines, as I told earlier also, one in a finite region, an inclined line, and the other a horizontal line representing non-failure. This is for the mild steel. We can see here it is always a straight line in case of mild steel, whereas it was curved for other materials. The stress at which the curve becomes horizontal is known as the fatigue limit or the endurance limit. So the mechanism of this fatigue now we will discuss. How does this fatigue happen? So final failure in fatigue is due to extension of a crack to critical value at which the uncracked portion is so small that a specimen cannot sustain a stress and hence fractures. So suppose I have a small hole, see in this I have a small hole of a very say millimeter diameter, 1 millimeter diameter, and now due to this fatigue it becomes larger, 2 millimeter, further 6 millimeter, 8 millimeter, like that, and it goes up again and again. So finally it will reach up to a point where the material which is uncracked will be very less, so it will rupture. So this is a kind of the mechanism in fatigue, that this small crack goes on increasing in diameter or in dimension, and it becomes bigger as the load is being applied on it, dynamic load is being applied on it. This crack initiates from a microscopic area, as I told you, where stresses are high due to some metallurgical defect. So stresses can be high in that region where the crack is, even if the crack is small, due to some metallurgical defect. So there are various kinds of metallurgical defect. That's why manufacturing defect and metallurgical defect are important. Due to high stress at any point in a crystalline material, localized yielding would take place, resulting into slip in the direction of maximum shearing stress. So slip happens in this case, and shearing stress is also causing this particular crack to grow. As the stress cycling continues, the slip causes very minute cracks to generate, and they keep on growing slowly and progressively with increasing number of cycles, like I have explained to you earlier. Surface of fracture has a very characteristic appearance which shows that the progressive nature of crack propagation of fatigue. So it's mostly on the surface that the fatigue starts. So surface of fracture has a very characteristic appearance. By just looking the fracture surface, one can distinguish that the surface is divided into two regions, one is smooth and the other rough and jagged. So just you take a specimen which was under fatigue, so you will be able to make out from the surface itself that one region is very smooth, the other one is rough and jagged. The rough area is the one over which final fracture took place in the stride manner. The smooth region is the one over which fatigue crack propagated slowly and progressively after its initiation. So the rough area is the one where fracture will take place, and the smooth one is the one where this propagates slowly. The two crack faces remain in contact. So the rough and the smooth one both are in contact with each other, and they constantly rub against each other. They are rubbing against each other, so they become very smooth. So these two surfaces are rubbing against each other, causing a smooth surface to come up. If one examines the smooth zone very carefully under microscope, the point at which the crack initiated can be located. So from the smooth zone, if we see under a microscope, we can get the point from which this crack has initiated. It is seen that marks like beach markings in form of conchoidal rings spread out from the point. So there are some rings. You know a ring, it's a somewhat concentric circle, so that type of rings come up. These beach markings represent the sties where crack is stopped momentarily. In many cases, this nature of fatigue fracture surface can be seen by just visual examination. So under high power microscopes, the region between two conchoidal rings has been examined to have similar rings, and these are the sites where crack is stopped after each cycle. So we study this with the help of high power microscopes, because only then we will be able to differentiate between two conchoidal rings. The total number of cycles to failure as recorded has been found to coincide with the number of conchoidal marks. So these conchoidal marks are giving us the total number of cycles. So the study of these conchoidal marks are very important. That's why you use the high power microscope to know about the number of cycles, because they are exactly similar to the number of cycles of loading. So here is the figure. Figure shows the characteristics fatigue fracture surface. The proportionate area of any one zone is indicative of the level of stress. That is, if a smooth zone is much larger than rough zone, it indicates that the stress level was low, and vice versa. And if the smooth area is lesser, then it means that the stress level was quite high. Here in the figure you can see the smooth zone and the rough zone. There are conchoidal rings also. If there are several points of crack initiation, it indicates that some geometrical stress concentration on the surface was present. So suppose there are several points of cracks, or there are a number of small cracks, then that means that this specimen was subjected at that place to a very high stress concentration. In rotating bending, the conchoidal rings tend to turn and center on a different diameter. So if it is on a certain axis, then it turns and takes up a different diameter. It is shown in the figure, the tendency of the crack to propagate in a direction opposite to that of the rotation. Now we discuss about the statistical nature of fatigue. So the basic nature of fatigue mechanism suggests that one can expect a large variation in data. The initiation of a crack at a point in the material depends upon suitable combination of highest stress concentration due to local defect and level of stress, along with larger number of cycles. It is never certain after how many cycles a crack will initiate and then become unstable to cause fracture. So we are never knowing how many cycles we need for a crack to go up to the rupture point. So it's a guess type of work, iterative type of work. These events eventually depend upon the distribution of defects, which is highly statistical in nature. That's why we are discussing the statistical nature of fatigue. On testing several specimens at a particular stress level, all of them fail at a different stress. So suppose there is a specimen and you are testing it at a particular stress level, then what happens that all of them may be failing at a different stress. We have defined a certain stress level, but some plus or minus is there in every case. So this will be true of any other stress level as well. This creates difficulty in analyzing fatigue. For example, in plotting the stress versus the log n curve. So how we'll plot the curve? Because we don't know at what stress level we can say is the endurance limit. Normally the distribution of n or log n is considered for calculation of standard deviation and confidence level on arithmetic mean of each data set for a particular stress level. So we generally, the plus or minus around a particular stress level is taken up, and we take the mean of that to determine at what stress level it is going to fail, or what will be the endurance limit. So in the figure you can see the line which is shown passes through the arithmetic means and thus represents a 50% probability of failure or survival at any stress level for specified life. A number of specimens are tested at each stress level to establish stress versus the log n curve. So determination of fatigue strength or limit of a material becomes still more complicated if one recognizes the fatigue limit or strength as a stress level above which the material will fail and below which it will not fail. So it is quite difficult to determine this limit of the fatigue strength limit of the material. Several methods have been introduced for calculation of fatigue strength based upon the statistical methods. Thus we have got different statistical methods. So those statistical method I am not discussing here. You can read from your material, and further any queries there you can please address to me. And now we discuss the factors affecting fatigue behavior. Fatigue strength is most important property that is governed by fatigue behavior. Fatigue life at a given stress level may also be regarded as a fatigue property. Increased fatigue strength and increased life at a given stress mark improvement in fatigue behavior. So obvious it is if there is increased fatigue strength and increased life, then it is obviously better, because then it can take up more varying type of loads, and its endurance limit will increase. The stronger materials have higher fatigue strength. Half of ultimate strength in tension is equal to the fatigue strength obtained from a smooth polished specimen and rotating bending machine for steel. So it is seen that generally half of the ultimate strength in tension is equal to the fatigue strength for the stronger materials. If stress cycle is pulsating, the fatigue strength is 40% higher, and if reversible axial stress is applied, the fatigue strength is 15% lower. So we can see here that reversible axial stress is much more dangerous in one sense than the pulsating type of stress, because the fatigue strength is very much lowered in case of the reversible axial stress. Increasing size above 12 millimeter dia reduces the fatigue strength of the, we are mentioning the crack dia, while for very large size 200 millimeter diameter the size effect ceases. Suppose the dia goes above 200 millimeter, then this size will not have any effect on the fatigue strength as such. For low dia cracks, it will have an effect. Surface finish is perhaps the single most important factor that affects the fatigue strength. So the most important factor which is going to affect fatigue strength is surface finish. Fatigue strength improves if surface finish changes from as forged or drawn to turned and fine turned to ground and polished. So this is the variation. Fatigue strength is increasing as we are increasing the surface finish. Now, the forged one is the most crude one, then we go on to the turned one, and finally the fine tuned to turned one, or the ground one and polished one. So in this gradual scale is going towards more finished specimens, except in a few cases where inside of material has a defect, the fatigue crack initiates from the surface. So it is mostly a surface phenomena. Only exceptions are there where the crack may start from inside of the material. So the surface crack initiation in fatigue is because surface is inherently weaker, surface is exposed to corrosion and oxidation, it is surface at which cutting and forming forces act, and stress is inherently highest at surface, whether axial, bending, torsional or combination, whatever it is. So we see here that it depends on the surface how the fatigue failure will take place or how the crack will propagate. Practical applications place some stress concentration on the surface. Corrosion and high temperature damage surface. Good surface finish and surface mechanical and heat treatment like short peening, surface rolling, carburizing, nitriding, cyaniding, all these things, and this you will be studying further when we discuss the ferrous alloys and all those in the upcoming lectures. So these are certain processes, heat treatment processes are also there. So these help obtain improved fatigue properties. Vanadium is the only alloying element that improves fatigue strength of steel. So only element that is improving the fatigue strength of steel is vanadium, nothing else. Only vanadium we can alloy. So further now we discuss material problems at elevated temperatures. So most materials we see lose their strength at higher temperatures. Reason being greater mobility of atoms at high temperatures. Like earlier also I discussed that if the molecules inside the material are very close enough or they are compact, and it has got greater strength or greater hardness. So similarly, if temperature is applied, they start moving away from each other. So the strength goes down. The elastic constants also reduce at high temperatures for the same reason, and hence greater deformation results at elevated temperature. The elevated temperatures further deteriorate material behavior by causing oxidation. So oxidation is a phenomena where a certain layer is formed which can harm the surface of the material. So a demand of high temperature resistant materials. Why we are studying this temperature effect? Because nowadays we are seeing huge demand of high temperature resistant materials because we are using them at different places. Like there is constant demand of high technology involving applications in nuclear engineering, steam and gas turbines, high pressure boilers, oil technology, transportation engineering, so many fields are there. The modest temperature of 500 degrees centigrade in steam turbines has increased to 800 degrees centigrade in gas turbines. So we require material accordingly, otherwise it will not work at 800 degrees centigrade. And requirement of highly powerful engines are there for jet planes, and it has pushed this limit to 1000 degrees centigrade. So high temperature resistant materials is very much required. The rocket engines, nose cones of ballistic missile and re-entry vehicle faces still high temperatures. We know that those space shuttles, when they are coming back into the atmosphere, the temperature is very high. They can fail if the material is not of that category which can withstand those high temperatures. While static properties of materials are not much affected by time required for testing at room temperatures, the strain rate affects high temperature properties greatly. So we have studied strain rate in the previous sessions, and it does affect the high temperature properties. It is characteristic of high temperature properties that time element becomes important for them. Particularly important because a static load much below yield load of material could result into gradual deformation at elevated temperature. So even when we haven't reached the yield point in the stress strain diagram, before that this deformation can start taking place because of the high temperature. So plastic deformation can start even before that. So it's very important to study about the high temperature effect. To study these high temperature effects, there is a property which we need to know, that is known as the creep. So theoretically speaking, at any temperature, a material will progressively deform under a constant load even if the stress is below yield. However, such deformation is negligibly small. The progressive deformation of a material at high temperature under constant stress is termed as creep. So this is the definition of creep. What will happen, that there will be a progressive deformation of the material at high temperature under a constant stress. So that stress may be lower than the yield point stress. Creep can become quite appreciable depending upon the combination of temperature and stress. So creep is dependent on both temperature as well as stress. The deformation of material in laboratory is mostly measured as a strain suffered by tension specimen. So when we do laboratory tests, we do it in terms of strain only. The temperature at which creep becomes appreciable is half of the melting point temperature on absolute scale and is known as the homologous temperature. The creep experiments can be performed in simple machines that use dead weights and lever for loading the tension specimen. So there are machines in which the specimen is placed inside a furnace and certain temperature is given, or the temperature is raised, and similar kind of setups there as in the simple tension test. Additional thing is that we have a furnace also to raise the temperature to different levels. So then load is applied at one end, and through that the load will act on the specimen, and the temperature will also be raised. So we will see what will be the effect on the specimen due to this various loads and the temperature. So you can get the figure from any site or internet for that. And the specimen then is surrounded by a furnace, as I told you, whose temperature can be controlled and recorded accurately along with elongation of the specimen. So now we are going to discuss a very important curve which is known as the creep curve, and we need to understand this. The creep curves are plotted between strain and time. Like I told you earlier that generally in laboratory strain is measured. So this is a curve between strain and time for given stress and temperature. So the stress is constant and the temperature is constant. The variables are the strain and the time. One typical curve is shown in this figure for constant stress S and temperature T. So the specimen is loaded at a certain point, say O. O is the origin, and it corresponds to 0 strain and 0 time. Immediately after the application of stress, the specimen suffers from elastic strain up to point A. So OA, you see, this is elastic strain. So whenever you will remove the load from here, it will come back to its origin. That means the strain can be fully recovered. As the time passes, so now it is a time dependent thing also. So time comes in, time will pass, the specimen continues to extend with decreasing rate up to point B. So now the rate of extension has gone down and it will continue up to the point B, and further when we move further from the point B, then it will become a constant and it will remain as such from B to C. That means the rate of the extension will be a constant. That means the line will have a constant slope as shown in the figure. From point C onwards, the rate of increase of creep strain increases up to point D, where the fracture or rupture takes place. So this is the whole thing. It is divided into three portions, which I am now discussing with you. So here you can see the creep curves are plotted between a strain and time for given stress and temperature. There are three things here, three phases. So although the description of creep curve appears to be quite simple, the collection of data involves complicated control, measurement and recording system. So as such, when we see that, it seems very simple that with time and temperature this elongation is taking place, but this time actually is a very long time, and it becomes very complicated to do such type of experiments. The important point to note is that the total time required in the creep curve may be very large, ranging from a few months to as long as 10 years. So we will have to wait up to 10 years. The instruments are supported to be working throughout this time. Generally, a battery of machines is required to make simultaneous studies at different temperatures and stress levels. So here we see in this curve again that the creep curve is conveniently divided into three stages. The stage 1, which we discussed earlier, is of primary creep, and it extends from point A to B. So from point A to B, there is a slight decrease in the rate of this extension, and this covers a small part of the total period. The creep during this stage is often referred to as transition creep, and rate of creep decreases because of strain hardening of the material. So in this zone from A to B, the strain hardening is taking place. That's why the creep elongation or deformation is decreasing. From B to C, it can be seen that rate of creep is constant. As I told earlier, that the slope of the slide is constant, and so it is a linear one. This is known as stage 2 or creep, and is identified by its constant rate. During this stage, minimum constant creep rate is attained. This steady state creep is the result of balance between two effects. So why it is happening like this? Now we are understanding. There are two effects. One is the strain hardening, and the other one is the softening due to temperature. In the earlier case, from A to B, only strain hardening was taking place, whereas in this case, strain hardening is taking place, but it is being compensated by the softening due to the temperature. In service conditions, most machine parts which are required to have infinite life work in secondary creep zone. The final or tertiary creep from point C is marked with increasing creep rate, ultimately culminating into rupture or separation of a specimen into two pieces. So finally we reach to the rupture point. It may be pointed out here that during tertiary creep, the necking also takes place, like we had seen in the simple tension test. So here also necking takes place, which increases effective stress, and thus rate of strain also increases. If creep load is removed at any point like E during stage 2, then immediate elastic recovery takes place, as shown in the figure from E to F. So elastic recovery again takes place if the load is removed at point E, but it is not complete recovery like it was from the region O to A. This shall be followed by a gradual strain recovery to permanent strain, which does not recover at all. So now we discuss about the effect of temperature on creep. So temperature effect is there on the creep as well. Basic nature of creep curve remains same at various stress level for several temperatures and vice versa. So the type of the creep curve will remain same whether stress is different or the temperature is different. However, higher the temperature, higher will be the creep strain for same stress level and time lapse. So if the stress level is maintained at a certain point and temperature is varying, so you can see from the figure that this strain is increasing. Strain is going on increasing because it is the curve between the strain and the time. It may be observed from this figure that a steady state creep of stage 2 tend to become shorter as the temperature increases at given stress level. So from the figure it is quite obvious, it is seen that the second stage is decreasing as we go up to higher temperatures for the same stress level. Similar is the case when we have different stress levels. Earlier we had different temperatures. Now we have different stress at the same temperature, suppose. So for a given temperature and same lapse of time, creep strain will be higher again at higher stress level. It may be observed from the figure that a steady state creep of stage 2 tend to become shorter as the stress increases at a given temperature. So the same case again here is that if the stress is going higher, at a given temperature, then the reason 2, which we have seen earlier, of the 3 reasons of the creep phenomena will become shorter. So you can see this from the strain versus the time curve here, whereas the stress is going on increasing, it is also going on getting shorter. This 2 phase of the creep curve becomes shorter. So after studying about the temperature effects, let's see one more thing, that is a stress rupture. So in a creep curve, emphasis is on the strain measurement, like we saw earlier also, strain versus the time curve was there. So emphasis is there. The stress is chosen in such a way that the strain rate is minimum. The total strain in such tests seldom exceeds 0.5%, and time required for completion is in the range of 200 to 10,000 hours. So you can see the time range is quite large, but the strain is quite less. So our goal is to tolerate the creep deformation and prevent rupture. So our goal is this, that we can tolerate the creep deformation, but the material should not go up to rupture point. But long time is consumed in performing such creep tests, which may impede technological development. So to cut short this time, stress rupture tests in which specimens fail by rupture have been developed. The basic information that is obtained from the stress rupture test is the time to cause failure at a given nominal stress for a constant temperature. So we keep the temperature constant and then we see at what nominal stress the material is going to fail. The stress rupture curves are obtained by plotting rupture stress against time of rupture. So we plot the rupture stress versus the time of rupture. The strain at rupture can be as high as 50%. So there can be strain of 50%, up to the level of 50% in the material, and time required may not be more than 1000 hours. So we see here that the time has lessened, so we can perform this test much easily as compared to the creep test. It was taking around 10,000 hours earlier. The results of such tests can be directly used where creep deformation is tolerated but fracture is to be prevented. But there is a drawback of the stress rupture test. The drawback is that with such a test is that at higher temperature some metallurgical changes may take place which change the slope of the straight line on the log scale, as you can see in the figure. At high temperature the slope is changing. So now we further discuss creep and rupture strength. Creep limit as such cannot be defined, like we had the endurance limit in case of fatigue, but creep limit is very difficult to define. There is no limiting stress at which creep does not take place. So we cannot say, okay, below this level of stress creep will not occur. So it is not that kind of phenomena. Creep strength is defined as a stress at a given temperature which produces a minimum creep rate at a certain amount, usually 0.0001% per hour or 0.001% per hour. Rupture strength is also there, which refers to the stress at a given temperature to cause rupture after a certain specified period, usually 100, 1000 or 10,000 hours. The creep strength and rupture strength plotted against temperature are greatly useful to designers in making selection of the material. So both these properties, creep strength and rupture strength, are extensively used by the designers for selection of material. So there are certain creep parameters. Creep we know is a very slow process, and for appreciable deformation to take place, it may take a very long time. There is no means by which the creep test can be accelerated. We don't have any means right now. But technologically, development cannot wait for assimilation of data on a new material. So suppose we have to use a new material and we don't have the creep properties, then we cannot wait for years. So then methods to predict long-term creep behavior by making use of short-term tests are very much required. So we have to do then short-term tests, and then what we can do is then extrapolate that. So that was the thing that is being talked about in this method, that there are certain methods which depend on the extrapolation of data. We do short-term tests and then we go for the long-term ones with the help of the extrapolation of the data. So in this session, we came to know about the phenomena of fatigue, its mechanism, and various high temperature resistant materials, why they are required, and the creep phenomena. Because we require high temperature resistant materials, so we went into the creep phenomena as well. So these were the things that were discussed, and further we will discuss in the upcoming lectures. Thank you very much.